Okay, good evening and welcome to once again our program for a series of 4 talks, Torah take on motivational books. We've done this for several years now, and grateful that the other rabbis of our shul will be speaking and lending their wisdom and insights and what they've gained from some of their favorite books. And I want to talk to you tonight about a book that we've shared before, Atomic Habits, James Clear. Spoke on Shabbos Shuvah a few years ago. And in fact, you could find it online. You could watch. It was back in the day that Shabbos Shuvah was being streamed. So it is on YouTube with a full length. It's an hour and a half. But before you panic, we're trying to change our habit of not speaking so lengthy. So we're going to do a more condensed version and a chazara, a reminder, review, and add some new ideas and new notions to try to inspire ourselves. This is the time of year. It's Elul. We're counting down, counting up towards a better version of ourselves. And it begins with change. Begins with changing our habits and forming more positive and better ones. The reality is that we are creatures of habit. I'll never forget when we moved. We used to live in Captiva. We moved to Thornhill Green many years ago. And it was a few weeks after we had moved, not hours or days. And I was driving back from somewhere. I was driving home from somewhere. Probably was on the phone talking. And all of a sudden, I found myself in the driveway of our previous home. I started to get out of the car, and then I said, 1 second, what am I doing here? We don't live here anymore. And I realized at that moment to what extent we're creatures of habit, that my feet and my hands, the gas pedal and the steering wheel, took me out of habit to where I'd been used to going for years. And therefore, since I was so thoughtlessly going through life, momentum carrying me, I ended up at a different destination than I was meant to be. And that's a metaphor really for what happens to all of us. That throughout our lives, if we're not paying careful attention, if we're not mindful, if we're not thoughtful and we're not aware, if all we're doing is allowing our habits to drive us in life, we'll get to destinations different than where we're meant to go, different where we're meant to be. So habits are a double-edged sword. So much of our day is pre-programmed, predetermined by the habits that we formed. We are at all stages of life here, and we have all kinds of habits that we've developed over time, from the most mundane things to how we brush our teeth or get out of bed or get dressed, to much more meaningful things like our punctuality or lack thereof, our attitude or approach towards time. We've developed all kinds of habits. And habits are a double-edged sword because if you develop good habits, then it's fantastic to be a creature of habit. If you can't go to bed without flossing your teeth, no matter what time you come in, then that's a great habit. Whereas if you procrastinate and are lazy and snooze 15 times, it's a bad habit. Habits are not necessarily good or bad. They all depend on the habit that we formed. And the fact that we're such creatures of habit can work to our advantage, because if we form good habits, the right habits, then we can be creatures of good habits. So that's our topic for tonight, a more condensed version, but a review of some of the most salient, some of the most powerful and potent points from this incredible book, Atomic Habits, James Clear. It's an enormous amount of research and science. It's based on an enormous amount of wisdom and real life practice that I can't encourage you strongly enough to read the book. And the reason we do this series, Chazal, our rabbis tell us that Chochmah b'goyim ta'amin, there's a lot of wisdom in the world at large. And while if one looks in the Torah, hafochva v'hafochva b'kulaba, if you look through our sacred Torah, it is the blueprint of creation, and everything is in it. And that's what we'll see tonight, that all the wisdom that is communicated through more contemporary terms and vocabulary in some of these motivational books, it's already been part of our timeless Torah and wisdom forever, since the Torah was given. But the generation that we're in, the time that we live in, sometimes we need a different language, a different vocabulary, a different communication to get it across. And so, Chachma b'goyim ta'amin, there's beautiful wisdom. There's a lot of science and research. There's a tremendous amount of motivation. But what we'll see tonight, a Torah take on this book, is that it was all in the Torah long before, and we'll see the way the two come together. So before we even get to the book, I'll open with an insight. Again, we can't do justice to an entire book in a few minutes this evening, but some of the most powerful points that I've taken out that I'm still trying to work on myself. Pasuk says in Sefer Dvarim, Perek Yud Beis, you have to destroy and eradicate all of the places the non-Jewish, that the idolatrous nations served. When we enter the land of Israel, when we conquer, And when we inhabit that land, there'll be all kinds of corruption, contamination, all kinds of influences that if we're not careful to eradicate and to purge, if they're allowed to remain, they can easily, and we've seen the impact of the Jewish people, not only in Israel, all around the world, when we are exposed to spiritual contamination, we're vulnerable. So the Torah tells us, Abeid ta'abdun, get rid of it. And the question is, why the redundancy, the double language? Abeid ta'abdun, you must destroy. Even the translation is you must destroy, but that's not what it says. Abeid ta'abdun, you must destroy. You must really destroy. You must super destroy. Rashi in the words tells us, Ibeid v'achar kach ta'abdun, mikan la'oker avodah zarah shetzorach l'sharish achareha. Destroy and again destroy. And says Rashi, this teaches that not only do you have to destroy what's on the surface, what you see, but you have to get down to the roots. You have to understand where it comes from. You have to uproot. I'm sure you have this experience. You can cut weeds all day long, but if you don't pull out the weeds, if you allow the roots of the weeds to remain, they'll continue to grow and revisit and recur over and over again. So that idolatry, you can't just eliminate or remove it on the surface level, but after you have to dig deep in the root and you have to uproot it where it is. The Sefas Emes, the great Ger Rebbe, Yehuda Aryeh Leib, author of Ger, he says based on this Rashi a life lesson, and this is one of the early teachings of the book Atomic Habits. Hu klal lachol akaras mida v'taiva ra'a. We have all kinds of bad character traits, qualities, things that we're trying to change about ourselves. We have negative habits. Some people fly off the handle, get angry, in a fit of rage easily. Some people grow impatient. Some people are stingy. Some people are arrogant. Some people are jealous or envious. We have all kinds of character traits that we need to work on. No one is perfect. No one is perfect. But Footner says that after the creation of earth, the second greatest, most magical, most miraculous creation of the world is the creation of a new habit. The ability to change a character trait or habit is almost no less miraculous than the creation of the world itself. That's how difficult it is. It's been said by many of the Balei Musar that changing ourselves, if you're a person who always runs late, perpetually runs late, predictably runs late, to become punctual, to have a time awareness, is harder than learning all of Shas. It's harder than knowing all of Torah. So sometimes we minimize for the people around us, not ourselves. For ourselves, we always can explain and excuse and justify. But for others, we sometimes minimize. Like, just change that. Just stop eating that. Just come on time. Just don't raise your voice. Just don't feel angry or jealous. But it's not impossible. It's extraordinarily difficult. So says the Sefas Emes. This is a clue. This is a hint. This is a fundamental idea in change and in changing a habit. We have to have a self-awareness. It's going to be our topic of Shabbos Shuvah this year, the conversations we have with ourselves, our relationship with ourselves. It's going to be our topic. We have to know who we are, what we have to work on. We have to identify it. Then how do we make the change? How do we become the people we hope and are meant to be? Says the Sefas Emes, Levad habitul b'maisa tzrichen la'akor kol reshima ra'a b'leiv. You can't just eliminate the behavior. You can't just change the superficial habit. You have to get to the root. You have to get to what's driving it. Why? Why are you always late? Where does that come from? What's the cause? Is it genetic? Is it learned? Is it a habit? Is it a fear? Is it a disregard for other people's time? Is it laziness? You have to get to the core. That's why we have the double language. You have to get rid of the habit, the practice, but then you have to get to the core, what's underneath it, what's driving it, where does it come from, why is it happening? And we need divine assistance. That's why it's the Abeid Ta'abdun. We do our part, and Hashem will help us and He'll match us, and we'll be able to do it. And here's one of the early lessons, the fundamental lessons of the book, Atomic Habits. You should buy it. I'm not trying to read to you from it in a way to steal from James Clear. He writes the following. I'll share with you some excerpts from the book as we go. Again, Torah principles communicated in a contemporary way, and I think a very compelling way and motivational way in this book, Atomic Habits. He writes, true behavior change is identity change. You might start a habit because of motivation, but the only reason you'll stick with one is it becomes part of your identity. So maybe you were inspired by the Siyum Shas and you take up Daf Yomi. Maybe you're inspired by Siddur snippets, so you think about Hashem's Sefasai Tivtach for the first day or 2 days or the first week. Maybe you read a book or you saw a video or you heard a speaker and it inspired you to not get angry or to lead a much healthier life or lifestyle. Motivation will help you start a habit. But the only way that you'll keep that habit is not when you see it as an expression of being motivated, but when there's a core identity change. What does he mean? Anyone can convince themselves to visit the gym or eat healthy once or twice, but if you don't shift the belief behind the behavior, it's hard to stick with long-term change. Improvements are only temporary until they become who you are. So you can't say, I'm still the old person, but I'm working on changing. You can't see yourself in the paradigm or in the mode that you were. You have to see the core identity has changed. For the example, the goal is not to read a book. The goal is to become a reader. The goal is not to run a marathon. The goal is to become a runner. The goal is not to learn an instrument. The goal is to become a musician. You see the difference between focusing on the verb, the action, the behavior, versus saying the noun, my identity. I'm a runner. I'm a patient person. I'm a learner. I'm a person of faith in conversation with Hashem. I'm patient. I'm generous. It's not just I gave generously. I am generous. I didn't go for a run, so I've got an app on my phone that tracks my habits, and I ran, and I saw I'm picking up a pace, and I'm running more. If all you focus is on the behavior, but you don't fundamentally transform who you are, you can't change. Your behaviors are usually a reflection of your identity. What you do is an indication of the type of person you believe that you are, consciously or non-consciously. Research has shown that once a person believes in a particular aspect of their identity, they're more likely to act in alignment with that belief. For example, people who identified as being a voter were more likely to vote than those who simply claimed voting was an action they want to perform. Similarly, the person who incorporates exercise into their identity doesn't have to convince themselves to train. Doing the right thing is easy. After all, when your behavior and your identity are fully aligned, you're no longer pursuing behavior change. You're simply acting like the type of person you already believe that you are. So you're not trying to focus on the behavior. I'm not on a diet, but rather I'm a healthy person who eats a healthy, lives in a healthy lifestyle. I'm not going for a run, I'm a runner. It also works in the inverse, which is it's pasnish to be a runner who doesn't run. It's pasnish to be a person with a healthy lifestyle who eats like a pig. It's pasnish to be a patient person who flies off the handle. So when a person can transform their identity, how we see ourselves fundamentally, who we believe we are and what we're capable of, then we can become that person. Soloveitchik points out in the Rambam, based on the Gemara and Kedushin and elsewhere, that we have a concept before tshuva, before change, before repair, before transformation. There's an idea, a thought called hirhur tshuva. Hirhur tshuva doesn't just mean I fantasize or contemplate or plan or have a vision for tshuva. It means fundamentally I see myself as different. You can't have tshuva without hirhur tshuva. Hirhur tshuva means I see myself as changed. Identity change. Not just behavior change, but identity change. He points out you have this problem in the opposite direction. Many people walk through life with a cognitive slumber, blindly following the norms attached to their identity, right? So if you have I'm a runner, I'm going to run. If I'm generous, I'm going to give generously. If I have a lot of emunah, then I'm going to feel Hashem's presence in difficult times. If I'm a davener, then how could I skip davening? If I'm a person who's on time, I'm punctual, how could I run late? But the opposite is also true in the most negative and damaging and destructive way. People say, I'm terrible with directions. Then you're going to get lost. I'm not a morning person. So then you'll never be productive in the morning. I'm bad at remembering people's names. I'm always late. I'm not good with technology. I'm horrible at math. There are 1,000 different variations. If our identity is intertwined with something negative, then our behavior is going to match. This is fundamentally important when it comes to parenting. We're told you never tell a child you're a bad child. You're a good child. That's bad behavior. It's beneath you. If you're a good child, then you're going to do good things. But if a child is told you're the clown, or you're the jealous one, or you're the impetuous one, or then their behavior is going to match what they've been told their identity is. That's why it's so important to shape that identity as parents, to give that belief and to lift, to give the identity. Pasuk says, just read at the end of Baruch Nafshi on Rosh Chodesh, Yitamu chata'im min haaretz. It doesn't say Yitamu chotim. Yitamu chata, and this is Bruria taught her husband, Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir wanted to get rid of these hooligans in the neighborhood. He just wanted to sit and learn. And all they did was make a lot of noise and disturb the neighborhood. And he wanted them to die. And Bruria, much more maternal, compassionate, says to her husband, Rabbi Meir, it says, Yitamu chataim, may sins be removed, not sinners, chotim. We don't daven that people, they don't have that identity. You're not a sinner. You're a good person who maybe made a mistake. Chataim, not chotim. Whatever identity we paint or whatever vision we have for our children is what they're going to become. And the same is true for ourselves. What's our identity? How we see ourselves is whom we're going to become. All of this I didn't share. This is all an addendum to that Shabbat Shuvah Drasha. So it's worth watching it, and this is new as well. But I'll share with you another one of my favorite insights regarding this, and then we have to move on. There's so many great points and principles from Atomic Habits. Yosef HaTzadik, great Yosef, is sold by his brothers, put in a pit ready to die, sold into slavery, abandoned, isolated, all alone, falsely accused by his master. And the great Yosef, he's in the home, and his master's wife is relentlessly pursuing him, seducing him, tempting him, literally throwing herself at him. The Torah tells us there was a particular day, it was a pagan holiday. Potiphar and all the members of the household would be at the church worshiping their idol. Mrs. Potiphar feigned sick. I can't go to church today, stay at home. And why? This was her opportunity. Yosef was worn down. He was ready to give in. He was going to grossly violate moral boundaries. And the Torah tells us that he came to do his work, lasos malachto, to do his work that day. And Rashi tells us, lasos malachto can be understood in one of two ways. Lasos malachto can mean to do his work, running the finances of the home. Lasos malachto can mean a euphemism. He came to work that day, meaning he was going to work with Mrs. Potiphar. And what happens? In the last moment. I won't describe it to you because we're in front of an Aron Kodesh and I don't need to paint the picture for you. Even the Torah essentially does. And he's about to give in to this temptation, which takes superhuman strength not to. He's alone. He's away from his family. He's suffering and struggling. She's been relentless in this pursuit. She's a beautiful woman. He's an attractive, vigorous young man. And how does he draw up the strength and the courage? What gives him that conviction not to give in? Chazal rabbis tell us he saw demustu yukno shel aviv. He saw the image of his father. My brother has a theory that Yosef, who at this point he's older than when he was last with his family, and he hasn't had access to a mirror, and now he's in her bedroom, and maybe he sees his reflection in something, and demustu yukno shel aviv. Yosef, at this point, a little bit older than he was, sees his own reflection, but he doesn't see himself. Whom does he see? He sees his father. And the classic understanding is demustu yukno shel aviv means he sees his father. His father's looking at him and says, Yosef, you're better than that. You've got this. You're strong enough. Walk away, overcome. You don't have to. That's the classic understanding. But I want to tell you another interpretation. Demustu yukno kama shel aviv. He didn't see the image of his father. Whose image did he see? He saw an image of himself. But it was demustu yukno. It was the image of himself, shel aviv. It was the image that his father had always painted for him of who he could be. Demustu yukno, his own image, but shel aviv, the one that belonged to his father. As Yosef grew up, Yaakov would say to him, Yosef, you're a tzaddik. Yosef, you're a good boy. Yosef, you've got this. Yosef, you're strong. Yosef, you have conviction. You have courage. You're tenacious, resolve. Do you know who you are? Do you know your potential? Do you know who you could become? And in that moment of truth, his identity kicked in and the behavior matched. And that's what James Clear says. Don't focus on changing your behavior only. More fundamentally, abeid te abdun, Sefas Emes. Don't just change the behavior, that's abeid. Te abdun, change your identity. I'm a runner. I'm a learner. I'm a davener. I'm punctual. I'm patient. I'm generous. I'm generous. So by Lawrence Kellerman, to Kindle a Soul, this book about parenting, told the story when he was here many, many years ago. He says the following story. It's an amazing story. Amazing story. His family's on a tiyul in Israel, and his young son says, I have to go to the bathroom. So every parent has been through this experience, panicking, looking for a bathroom, and they're driving. They're in some obscure area of Israel, a desert, there's no bathroom, and finally he finds a spot, and there's a civilization, and he pulls over, and he takes his son, who by this point is in the last moments doing the dance in the car, trying to hold it in. He grabs his son, he's about to run in, so his child finally can go to the bathroom. His child stops at the entrance and says, Abba, I can't go in there. He says, what do you mean you can't go in there? You've been crying, you've been screaming, you've been dancing, you've been holding it in, you've been telling me how badly you need to go. We finally found a place. What do you mean you can't go in there? His son's name is Kadosh. Kadosh means holy. The spot that they had found was a bar. And the son said, that's a bar, and I'm Kadosh. I can't go in there. I can't go in there. It's an amazing story, an amazing moment where Rabbi Kalman understood that as parents, the picture we paint for our children, the identity we give them, the behavior will match. It's true for our children and it's true for ourselves to focus not only on the behavior, to focus on our identity. Abeid to abdun, demus to yukno shel aviv. How do we see our own identity? Do we believe in the best version, a better version of ourselves? Or do we accept and do we give in and concede to a less version with ourselves? He goes on again, we don't have the time because we have so many other points to get to, but just to drop more, your identity emerges out of your habits. You're not born with the present beliefs. Every belief, including those about yourself, is learned and conditioned through experience. Your habits are how you embody your identity. When you make your bed each day, you embody the identity of an organized person. When you write each day, you embody the identity of a creative person. When you train each day, you embody the identity of an athletic person. Whatever your identity is right now, you only believe it because you have proof of it. If you go, we'll find and replace, to synagogue every Shabbos for 20 years, you have evidence you're religious. If you study biology for an hour every night, you have evidence you're studious. If you go to the gym, even when it's snowing, you have evidence that you are committed to fitness. So in other words, the habits we form become the evidence of our identity. But the inverse, the opposite can also be true. If we change our identity, then we can change our habits to match and to conform to that identity that we still have. So putting this all together, habits are the path to changing your identity. Most practical way to change who you are is to change what you do. Each time you write a page, you should not just go through the behavior and the habit, but see it as contributing to fashioning this new identity. You wrote a page, it's evidence I'm a writer. Each time you practice the violin, that's evidence I'm a musician. Each time you start a workout, that's evidence I'm an athlete. Each time you encourage your employees, that's evidence that I'm a leader. So identity informs habits, but the way we change our identity is by changing habits, which are the belief system that become compelling evidence for the identity. So decide the type of person you want to be, and then prove it to yourself with small wins and small victories, which we'll get to in a moment, the incremental way to change. So who do we want to be? Want to be more patient, more punctual? Want to have more faith, more amunah? Want to become a learner and focus on studying Torah? Want to become a better spouse, a better parent? How do we see our identity and then take on those habits, which will be evidence of the change of the identity that we've just taken on? Okay, next. The next point he makes is one of the greatest impacts on habits that we form and that we want to change, that we can become the people that we dream and believe and are meant to be, is our environment, the impact on the people around us, the context in which we live, the environment in which we place ourselves. We pick up habits in the people around us, he writes. We copy the way our parents handle arguments, the way our peers flirt with one another, the way our coworkers get results. When your friend smokes pot, you give it a try too. When your wife has a habit of double checking the door is locked, you pick it up as well. People imitate the behaviors around us. He quotes countless pieces of evidence to this point. To make your habits more attractive, you can take the strategy a step further. Join a culture where your desired behavior is the normal behavior and where you have already something in common with the group. So understand the impact of the people around us. There's countless evidence of people's health and wellness, and whether they gain weight or lose weight by who they hang out with and their patterns of behavior. I think this is very relevant in our community. I don't mean Boca Raton, but I mean the total community, where food plays such a fundamental role in meals on Shabbos and on Yontif, and the culture and the environment and the habits that we create in that area, in that arena. So who we choose to hang out with, socially, where we daven in shul, which section, which row, who we sit next to, all of these for a work environment where there's a cafeteria and you break out and sit and have lunch with someone, who we choose to expose ourselves to be with has an enormous impact on us. Nothing sustains motivation better than belonging to the tribe. It transforms a personal quest into a shared one. Previously, you were on your own. Your identity was singular. You are a reader. You are a musician. You are an athlete. But when you join a book club or a band or a cycling group, your identity becomes linked to those around you. Growth and change is no longer an individual pursuit. We are readers. We are musicians. We are cyclists. The shared identity begins to reinforce your personal identity. This is why remaining part of a group after achieving a goal is crucial to maintaining your habit. Friendship and community that embed a new identity and help behaviors last over a long run. That's what Yiddishkeit is all about. It's a platform for community, micro-community, community within community, and small breakout communities. You go to Daily Minyan, you're part of a community of daveners. You're part of a Daf Yomi, you join the MKY club, you join whatever area of learning or project or goal, it has an enormous impact. Again, he has a lot of evidence from research. We don't need it. We have the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Deos tells us, Derech briyasa shel adam lios nimshach b'deosav v'v'masav achareav v'chaverav v'noeg keminag anshe medina. So it's natural for a person's character and actions to be influenced by friends and associates, and we follow the social norms of behavior. If the people around us talk in davening, we're going to end up talking. That's the bottom line. If people share gossip and lashon hara, then we're going to. If people are unhealthy, then we're going to allow ourselves to become unhealthy as well. And therefore, writes the Rambam, understand that when we choose our friends, we're choosing our identity. If we want to change our identity, sometimes we need to change our friends. That's a whole separate subject that we're not getting into. How do you do that respectfully, kindly? How do you break up or drop a friend who's a negative influence? Shouldn't we be kind and compassionate and patient? And who should they be friends with? That's a whole separate conversation and an important one. For the purposes of this conversation, how we form better habits and become the people we want to and dream and believe we can, we need to consider enormously the influence and the impact of the people around us. Even before the Rambam, long before the Rambam, 1,000 years before the Rambam, our rabbi said this in Pirkei Avos. It's a Mishnah in the first chapter of Pirkei Avos. Nitay ha'abeli omer harchek mishachein ra v'al tischaber l'rasha v'al tisyayish min ha'puranos. Nitay, the Arbeli, north of Israel, keep distance from from a wicked neighbor, and don't become attached to a rasha, a wicked person, and al tisyayish min ha'puranos. It's a very interesting Mishnah. Distance yourself from a bad neighbor, and don't attach yourself to a wicked person. Who's worse, a wicked person or a bad neighbor? A wicked person. A bad neighbor is just a bad neighbor. They're maybe a good person, but they're a bad neighbor. So why does the Mishnah caution us to be even more extreme? When it comes to the wicked person, don't attach yourself. When it comes to the bad neighbor, stay far away. Why would we be cautioned to be even more vigilant, to stay further away when it comes to the bad neighbor? And the answer is, you know which one is more dangerous? The rasha, you look at and you say, it's a rasha, I'd never come close, I have no interest, I'm repulsed, I don't want to hang around a rasha, a wicked person. But a bad neighbor is not necessarily a bad person, it's just a bad neighbor. It could be a bad influence. And therefore, a person has to be even more vigilant to keep their distance. So the Rambam, the Mishnah and Pirkei Avos remind us of the impact of those around us. So James Clear Atomic Habits, he says we tend to imitate the habits of 3 social groups: the close, which are family and friends, the many, the tribe, and the powerful, those with status and prestige. And we have to have awareness of that. These are the 3 influences. The close, family, tend to blend together and follow each other's habits, husband and wife, and so on, pick up each other's habits. The many, which is the tribe, the masses, tend to pick up, it's contagious. And then the powerful, people watch. Imagine the impact of social media and watching. People want to be like them and imitate them and so on. One of the most effective things we can do to build better habits is join the culture where our desired behavior is the norm, as we saw, and we have something in common with that group. This is, in fact, the entire essence and purpose of Torah and mitzvos. The Rambam elsewhere in Hilchos Temimah writes, the whole purpose of Torah is to be a platform to create community, to connect, to be influenced positively in our behavior, in our actions, in the people that we are, with. The next point he says in Atomic Habits. Lesson number 3, at least for tonight. Again, we can't do justice to the entire book. Is the importance of self-awareness. If you live with a distorted view of yourself, if you live in fantasy land, if you look at, I once spoke on Rosh Hashanah, I talk about the people who say, they see a picture of themselves, they say, oh, I hate that picture. I look terrible in that picture. That's how you look. People hear their voice on a recording, oh, I can't listen to that. I hate the way I sound in that record. That's how you sound. We tend to live, you know those funny mirrors? You know, funny mirror you can look at, makes you look much thinner than you are, or distorts you look different than you are. Our mind produces funny mirrors of our lives. We see ourselves the way we wish we were, rather than the way we are. And real change begins when we have self-awareness, when we understand and admit who we are and what we look like, and we understand who we are, when we have that level of a self-awareness. That's why Rav Soloveitchik writes, in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, you had the kior, the basin where the priest would wash, was next to the Mizbeach. What was the kior made out of? What was the base of the basin? The copper. Where did it come from? The mirrors that the women beautified themselves in Mitzrayim and Egypt. When the men withdrew and said, how could we bring children into this horrific, cruel world? The women beautified themselves, seduced their husbands, and are responsible for our continuity, responsible for the entire existence of the Jewish people. And when Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to incorporate these mirrors which were donated by these righteous women, Moshe Rabbeinu said, it's disgusting. The mirrors are instruments of vanity. How could it find a place in the holy, holy Mishkan, the tabernacle? And God said, Moshe, those are the most precious to me. Those are the most beautiful to me. And there are many explanations what was going on in this conversation between God and Moshe. Rav Soloveitchik writes something so powerful. He says, you know why those mirrors are critically important? Because what's the Kohen doing when they approach the Mizbeach? Mizbeach, the altar, is a place of ascent. They're trying to grow, trying to elevate, trying to improve, trying to be better. You know what the prerequisite is to it? You have to look in the mirror. Before you can improve or grow, before you can better yourself, you have to look in the mirror and admit who you are. If you have a distorted view of yourself, if you live life looking through the funny mirror, if you see yourself the way you wish you were rather than the way you are, how could you ever grow or change? You don't have an accurate baseline of where you start. So said Rav Soloveitchik, first you have to look in that kior. When you wash, you look in that mirror, and then you can go get atonement. Then you can approach a mizbeach. Then you can go change. That is the purpose of mitzvos. It gives us a identity, a self-awareness. It is the mirror through which we see ourselves. And that's what he writes in Atomic Habits. If you're having trouble determining how to rate a particular habit, ask yourself, does this behavior help me become the type of person I wish to be? Does this habit cast a vote for or against my desired identity? With enough practice, your brain will pick up on the cues that predict certain outcomes without consciously thinking about it. Once our habits become automatic, we stop paying attention to what we're doing. The process of behavior change always starts with awareness. You need to be aware of your habits before you can change them. How many people, when you say to them, you're always late, they say, what are you talking about? I'm on time. So keep a spreadsheet. Let's keep a spreadsheet. Let's follow. Carpool. Minyan. Meeting for coffee. Let's see what time we said we're going to be there. Let's see what time we're there. Right? What gets measured gets managed. One of my favorite quotes from Peter Drucker, the management guru. What gets measured gets managed. Keep a spreadsheet. Mark yourself. See whether your habit conforms to what you think. Oh, I barely ate anything today. Really? Let's take a look. Let's think out. Let's measure. Let's record what we eat. Oh, I get enough sleep. Really? What were you doing deep into the night? What device were you playing on when you're supposed to be falling asleep? How much sleep did you really get? What gets measured gets managed. You can't change a habit unless you're honest about it. You got to look in the mirror of the kior before you can approach the mizbeach of change. Pointing and calling raises your level of awareness from a non-conscious habit to a more conscious level by verbalizing your actions. The habit scorecard is a simple exercise you can use to become more aware of your behavior. He actually has a link online. If you Google James Clear, he provides a habit scorecard so that we can give ourselves an honest report card of our habits. Really, I'm very generous. You can't imagine what I give away. Rabbi, I'm sorry I can't contribute to this tzedakah because you don't know how much I do for my family, how much I give to these other places. Really? Let's see your tax returns. I love to say, you know what the real mirror is when you want to change habits? What doesn't lie? There are two things that don't lie. We have enormously distorted views of all of this, but the two things that don't lie. and they are our calendar and our credit card statements. How much time do you really spend with your spouse or your children in davening or in learning? What are we really spending our time on when we say, I don't have time to do that X, Y, or Z? Your calendar doesn't lie. You know what's a mirror? When that thing that we quickly swipe away because we don't want to see it pops up on the phone that says, here was your screen time for this week. We get rid of it quickly because no one wants to look at it and be honest what the screen time was for that week. Our calendar doesn't lie, and our credit card statement doesn't lie. Look at your budget. This is what you claim to care about. Let's see what we really care about. Let's see how we really spend our time. The habit scorecard, a real scorecard of who we are. This is the point of tefillah, of davening. Rav Hirsch writes, Hitpalel, from which tefillah is derived, originally meant to deliver an opinion about oneself, to judge oneself. In an inner attempt at so doing, such as hitpa'el. Hitpa'el is reflexive. It's something we do to ourselves. That root, pei, ayin, lamed, is to judge. Davening is a conversation with God, but Hashem is our mirror. Here are Hashem's values. Here's the formula for meaningful life. We take 3 steps forward and we look into a mirror. How am I really doing? Who am I? How have I improved myself? What needs to change? We're accountable and we're honest with ourselves. We're judging ourselves in our relationship with Hashem and our relationship with the world around us. In English, we call tefillah prayer, but this word only incompletely expresses the concept to pray. To ask for something is only a minor section of tefillah. The real point of tefillah, the real purpose of tefillah, is to judge ourselves, to evaluate ourselves, to become better. So, atomic habits, a person has to know themselves. You can't change a habit if you don't look in the mirror. You have to look in the kior before you can approach the mizbeach. We have to be honest and keep a real scorecard of who we are and what we want to change this Elul. What are we going to work on? What is this 40, less than 40 days now to Yom Kippur? 36 days, 37 days, 35 days. What is the challenge we're going to give ourselves? We're going to be more punctual, more generous. We're going to daven with more concentration. Are we going to show greater patience? Are we going to spend more time with the people we claim we love? Are we going to study more Torah? What change are we going? Are we going to jump out of bed and be on time? Are we going to get more sleep? Are we going to eat more healthy? What change? We're going to have more kavanah? Are we going to show more faith? What is it that needs work? Let's have an honest scorecard, and then let's track it and measure it, because only what gets measured gets managed. Next, we're in the home stretch, because some of you are struggling with the habit of keeping your eyes open. So the Gemara in Chagiga, next point. It's okay. I would be in this if I weren't standing up. You'd have to wake me up to finish. The Gemara Chagiga Daf Yud Zayin tells us a very important principle. Tafasta meruba, lo tafasta. Tafasta meruba, lo tafasta. Torah tells us in tremendous wisdom. When you try to take on too much, you take on nothing. Measured, calibrated, slow, incremental. If you try to do too much, you'll do nothing. Tafasta meruba, if you grab many, lo tafasta, you won't grab anything. It'll all fall and slip right through your fingertips. And this is perhaps, arguably, the most important, most powerful, I found, maybe the most practical insight of this book, Atomic Habits, James Clear. He talks about the notion of 1% better every day. Incremental change. It's so hopeful. It's so hopeful. Because when you talk about radical change, it's overwhelming. It feels impossible. You feel deflated before you even start some radical change. But if you think about a 1% change, it's doable. You can accomplish it. You can make it a reality. Small goals. Small goals. So he says the following. He says, habits are the compound interest of self-improvements. Same way that money multiplies through compound interest, the effects of your habits multiply as you repeat them. They seem to make a little difference on any given day, and yet the impact they deliver over the months and years can be enormous. It is only when looking back 2, 5, or perhaps 10 years later, the value of good habits and the cost of bad ones becomes strikingly apparent. This can be a difficult concept to appreciate in daily life. We often dismiss small changes because they don't seem to matter very much in the moment. If you save a little money now, you're still not a millionaire. If you go to the gym 3 days in a row, you're still out of shape. If you study Mandarin for an hour tonight, you still haven't learned the language. We make a few changes, but the results never seem to come quickly. Unfortunately, the slow pace of transformation also makes it easy to let a bad habit slide. If you eat an unhealthy meal today, scale doesn't move much. If you work late tonight and ignore your family, they'll forgive you. Procrastinate and put your project off till tomorrow, there's usually time to finish it later. A single decision is easy to dismiss. But when we repeat 1% errors day after day by replicating poor decisions, duplicating tiny mistakes, and rationalizing little excuses, our small choices compound into toxic results. It's the accumulation of many missteps, a 1% decline here and there, that eventually leads to a problem. The impact created by a change in your habits is similar to the effect of shifting the route of an airplane by just a few degrees. And I love this analogy, this metaphor. Imagine you're flying from Los Angeles to New York City. Pilot leaving at LAX adjusts the heading just 3.5 degrees south. Where will they land? LA to New York, and the pilot changes just 3.5 degrees the nose of the plane at takeoff. They'll end up in Washington, D.C. instead of New York. Such a small change is barely noticeable at takeoff. The nose of the airplane moves just a few feet, but when magnified across the entire United States, you're hundreds of miles apart. Similarly, a small change in your daily habits can guide your life to a difficult destination. Making a choice that's 1% better or 1% worse seems insignificant in the moment, but over the span of time, it has an enormous, enormous change. So he says, for example, the 2-minute rule. Even when you know you'll start small, it's easy to start too big. When you dream about making a change, excitement inevitably takes over, and you end up trying to do too much. Tafasta maruba, lo tafasta. Most effective way I know to counteract this tendency is to use the 2-minute rule. When you start a new habit, it should take less than 2 minutes to do. Read before bed each night becomes read 1 page. Do 30 minutes of yoga, take out the yoga mat. Study for class, open my notes. Fold the laundry, fold a pair of socks. Run 3 miles, put on your sneakers. The idea is to make your habits as easy as possible to start. Anyone can meditate for 1 minute, read 1 page, put on 1 item of clothing, put 1 item of clothing away. And just as we discussed, a powerful strategy, because once you started doing the right thing, it's much easier to continue. The new habit should not feel like a challenge. The actions that follow can be challenging, but the first 2 minutes should be easy. So 2 minutes to change that habit. Small, incremental, tafasta meruba, lo tafasta, if you take on too much. So here's another way that he says, another example. When someone wants to make the world a better place, they think of a grand, all-encompassing scheme, creating an organization that promotes world peace or justice. Someone wants to make themselves a better person, similarly thinks in terms of doing something major, extraordinary act of kindness or piety. They minimize and question the value of small actions. However, personal development comes through specifically small deeds. Consider the amount of the active ingredient in medication. Perhaps it's 1 milligram. A larger amount of that ingredient would cause damage rather than heal. It might even kill the person. So a person needs to do small changes. 1% change, and he talks about that. He talks about beautiful ways. We saw the tafasta meruba lo tafasta. I'll give you another example. Rav Wolbe, the great mashkiach, we love to quote Shlomo Wolbe Zatzal. He says, the author of Alei Shor, traveled to Israel's border with Egypt to encourage the Israeli soldiers. And Air Force pilots described to Rav Wolbe the best way for a pilot to avoid enemy radar is to fly low, which helps the plane remain undetected by enemy radar. So Rav Wolbe heard that and he said, wow, what a lesson for life. How do you protect yourself from the Yetzer Hara? Fly low, below the radar. When you announce some big 100% change, I'm never doing this again, I'm always doing that again, I'm going to radically change that, the enemy radar picks it up and shoots you out of the sky. But if you really want to make a change and avoid the enemy radar, fly below the radar. Small, 1%, little incremental change. It compounds enormously. When you read the section of the book, you'll see. Just learn 1 more minute. Read 1 more paragraph. 1%. Change an eating habit, 1%. An act, 1%. Small marginal change. 1% change accumulates enormously. We're almost there, I promise. Habit stacking. Another great insight. What he calls habit stacking. One of the best ways to build a new habit is to identify a current habit you already do and stack a new behavior on top of it. It's called habit stacking. Maybe you already have a good habit. You don't need to radically change something altogether. Just stack one habit onto another. Meditation. After I pour my cup of coffee each morning, I meditate for a minute. Exercise. After I take off my work shoes, I immediately change into my workout clothing. After I sit down to dinner, I say one thing I'm grateful for. We have all kinds of habits already in place, so attach a new desired habit to one of those habits that it's already in place. We also know this already. Torah already also told us. When did it tell us that? Mitzvah goreres, mitzvah. That if you do one good thing, one mitzvah, it's going to lead to and encourage and promote another mitzvah. Mitzvah goreres, mitzvah, habit stacking, one after the other, link them together, and you'll be more likely to do it. Mitzvah goreres mitzvah. And the last one I'll share with you tonight, and then you got to read the rest of the book for yourselves, is accountability partner. When we live on an island in isolation, when we decide we're going to change. So we looked in the kior in the mirror before we approach the mizbeach of change. We are honest with ourselves and we know which habits. We keep a real scorecard, report card on the habits we want to change. We're realistic and we're trying to change them incrementally, 1% marginal change, tafasta meruba. We're not taking on the world. Habit stacking, mitzvah goreres mitzvah, we're going to connect them and attach them to other habits that we want to. We're going to look at our identity, not just a habit. I've been a runner. I'm a runner, not just I go for a run. And then doing the right habits that support and that are the evidence for the identity we claim we want. We want all of that. But in the end of the day, it's really hard. So how do we get there? Accountability partner. Accountability partner. What is an accountability partner? Somebody that you designate or ask or report to that's going to hold you accountable for the new habit or the change that you want to have. And this too. Pasuk in Kohelet, Shlomo Melech told us, Tovim hashnayim min ha'echad, asher yesh lahem schar tov ba'amalam. Two are better than one. They have a greater benefit from their working together. An accountability partner to report. Remember in Elul, just a few years ago, we had a WhatsApp group for planking. We had 6 or 9 WhatsApp groups for different things we wanted to work on. Put our phone on airplane mode while we daven, all kinds of ideas. One of them was planking. So this worked incredibly. You know, last week somebody texted, how come nobody's writing on the WhatsApp group for planking? It's been dead for a couple of years now. Why did it work? You know what a plank is? You hold your arms out and you try to hold yourself as flat as a plank. You engage your core. It sounds very easy till 3 seconds in, you're shaking, sweating, and you're concerned you'll need a defibrillator. It's hard. So we had a WhatsApp group, and the members of the WhatsApp group, there was no communication, and there was no exchange of language. People just posted their time, how long they held the plank. Some obnoxiously posted their extraordinary time every night, just to make the rest of us feel bad about ourselves. But incredible plank. It was an accountability partner. You don't need to have an entire WhatsApp group with 300 people. It could be one person who you check in each day. How did you do on whatever habit we want to change together? Tova mashnayim. The Torah Temimah writes on this, Tova mashnayim. Tova mashnayim ha'uskim b'Torah min ha'echad she'osek la'atzmo. Don't do it on your own. It's easy to lie to ourselves, excuse ourselves. But we have to do it with an accountability partner who will hold us accountable and make us change to become the people that we are meant to be, the people that we're meant to become, the people we're meant to become. So we have that ability. It's in us. Atomic habits. If we employ these ancient ideas, maybe communicated in a new way through this book, but the Torah has always been telling us this Elul, as we continue to count up to stand before Hashem on Rosh Hashanah. The goals that we set for ourselves, we can become those people. It's never too late to become the person that you were meant to be. But we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to have resolutions, not just wishes. We have to engage in accountability partners. We have to have realistic goals and expectations. And we have to be able to move incrementally, not take on too much. And please God, we can all look back and see how much we have grown, the changes we've made, the habits we've formed, so that we're not mindlessly driving through life, finding ourselves at distant destinations other than the ones that we meant to go to. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and have a wonderful evening.